Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, nobody is taking the situation seriously enough. Rights investigators warn that civilians in Cameroon are suffering through sexual, physical and psychological violence as they're targeted by all the main players in an Anglophone separatist crisis that's gripped the country since 2016. Also, Senegal's future looks immediately more stable after President Macky Sall's decision not to seek a third term. There were fears that a different decision might have led to violence, but instead there's nothing but praise. Locals from Ethiopia's Lalibela play their part in restoring some of the iconic rock-hewn churches in the highlands. After having been occupied briefly during the country's war, the small city is now back on track with a conservation push. But first, executions, torture and rape are among some of the abuses suffered by people living in Cameroon's English-speaking northwest region. A damning investigation by rights group Amnesty International accused all sides in the Anglophone separatist crisis of terrorising civilians. Since 2016, they've been caught in the middle of a conflict between the army, armed separatists and militia. While over 4,000 civilians have died and over 700,000 forced from their homes by brutal violence. And yet, the emergency attracts little international attention. Our Indira Eteng has more.
In a new report that details rampant human rights violations and other crimes on the domestic law committed on the civilian population in the English-speaking regions of Cameroon, Amnesty International highlights the urgent need for the protection of those denouncing these atrocities on the civilian population. They urge Cameroonian authorities to act to end violence against the population and conduct thorough investigations into the killings, acts of torture, rape and the burning of houses in this part of Cameroon. The report exposes crimes committed by armed separatist fighters, military, as well as security and defense forces between 2020 and 2023. Amnesty International carried out investigations in the country, speaking to journalists, civil society actors, as well as some of the victims. Dr. Rausu Motayo is a lecturer at the University of Marwa and a defense specialist, and he calls on the Cameroonian army to take Amnesty International's report seriously.
It is not acceptable for people to not feel safe around the national army. That's the point of Amnesty International's report. Everyone should be paying close attention to this report, especially the army.
The Anglophone crisis resulted from a brutal response to a largely peaceful protest in 2016 and 2017, which demanded an end to the marginalization of the minority English-speaking population in Cameroon. It has since escalated into a situation of violence with an extreme loss of human life and the displacement of most of the victims into neighboring countries.
Now, Senegalese President Macky Sall shocked many observers on Monday night when he announced that he would not stand for a controversial, some would argue, unconstitutional third term in office. The country's been blighted by months of unrest and political repression. But Macky Sall's decision's gone some way to curtailing fears of further violence. Our Sam Bradpiece and Eleman Indawa have more.
A sense of relief hung over the streets of Dakar on Tuesday morning following Macky Sall's decision not to run for a third term in office. The announcement dominated front pages across the country, and many people we spoke to, including supporters of the president, said he had made the right call.
He's done the job. He's been in power for almost 12 years. It's the right decision for him to make way for others. The one who replaces him must be better.
In recent months, Senegal has been ripped by unprecedented levels of deadly unrest. This social worker is among those who believe Macky Sall's decision will go some way towards calming the situation.
Senegal is a country of hospitality. We are not used to violence. With the president standing down, after what he said yesterday, the entire country is satisfied.
The main opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko, effectively remains under house arrest after getting caught up in a sex scandal. For some, this remains a significant grievance against the government.
Ousmane Sonko and the other candidates should be allowed to participate in the election. There needs to be transparency in the electoral process. We need this to maintain peace.
Macky Sall's governing coalition, Benno Bokk Yakaar, has yet to name a successor to stand as a candidate in next year's presidential election.
Now, racial tensions have ratcheted up even further in the Tunisian city of Sfax after a man was fatally stabbed in a standoff between locals and migrants. 3 men, reportedly from Cameroon, have been arrested. The city's regularly seen xenophobic protests and more clashes were reported on Tuesday as the victim's funeral was held. Now, since February, as a whole, the country's seen a rise in racist attacks ever since President Kais Saied accused migrants of trying to change Tunisia's demographic makeup. Migrants currently make up an estimated 0.2% of the population. Staying with Tunisia, authorities there are increasingly cracking down on freedom of the press and freedom of speech. The month of June was particularly fraught for journalists and political opposition figures, with several journalists being summoned by the courts and the police for being critical of security forces. Our team sent us this report.
Journalist Ziad El-Henni starts his morning radio address on the EFM station by saying he's grateful to be able to speak on air. On June 22nd, he was freed after 48 hours in detention, accused of offending the president by denouncing President Kais Saied's abuse of power against opposition voices. Far from silencing him, the case against him has reinforced his will to fight for free speech.
Today we have a whole generation of journalists who entered the profession after the revolution of January 2011, who have had their eyes opened to freedom. So my duty is to prevent fear from re-establishing itself.
Yet this fear is threatening to take hold gradually. More than 20 political figures have been arrested since mid-February, allegedly for conspiring against state security. Ahmed Najib Chebi, an opponent of President Kais Saied, continues to speak out.
The big question is, why are more than 20 people in prison? No one knows 4 months on. And how long will they stay in prison? No one really knows.
In mid-June, the spokesperson for the judiciary's anti-terrorist unit said that it was illegal to cover the case in the media. She claims it would jeopardize the investigation. Some are worried about the erosion of press freedoms.
We haven't been able to examine the document stating this ban, and most of the lawyers following this case don't have access to the document. So we are really facing measures taken in an untransparent and very, very vague way.
On June 23rd, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights released a statement expressing deep concern at the increasing restrictions on free speech in Tunisia.
In DR Congo, women in politics are often at the receiving end of threats, intimidation and physical assault. A network of women lawmakers in Kinshasa is sounding the alarm. They're calling on the authorities to enforce existing rules and to investigate cases of assault. Our correspondents have more.
Still traumatized, Solange Mafuta hardly ever leaves home. She's a campaigner for an opposition party in DR Congo and was beaten up during a demonstration on May 20th.
These are all reports, x-rays, ultrasounds, because doctors worried I'd have internal bleeding.
Thankfully, her injuries weren't life-threatening, but she's still struggling with the psychological scars of her ordeal. She was stripped and violently assaulted. She says that her young attackers targeted her because of her politics.
I still have nightmares when I go to bed. Something sacred has been taken away from me. Even when I'm fully dressed, I still feel naked.
Attacks on female political figures in Kinshasa are on the rise. There have been cases of online harassment, verbal abuse, threats, and physical assault.
Bonjour.
This lawyer is trying to document the full spectrum of violence directed towards women involved in the country's politics.
How is it that you can be a member of a political party, be assaulted, and your party can't even make a statement to denounce it? Women tell us they want to be in politics, but the parties don't protect them.
Some also want to hold political parties more accountable for misogynistic violence carried out in their name. Despite laws promoting gender equality, Congolese politics are still male-dominated. This lawmaker fears harassment will discourage women from joining political parties.
It's often senior members of political parties who act in this way. If there were ethics and disciplinary committees within the parties that could impose punishments, I think this would be an effective way to reduce such behavior, which is rooted in our society.
This idea is a radical one for the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there are still no official figures on the number of women abused because of their politics.
And finally, Lalibela is known as the Jerusalem of Ethiopia. The small city is home to a World Heritage treasure, 11 rock-hewn churches from the 13th century. Now, France is helping preserve them with a joint conservation project that unfortunately did have to be stopped during the country's 2-year war, which saw the site temporarily occupied by soldiers. Work, though, has recently restarted. Our team has more.
After a 2-year war, activities have finally resumed to save Lalibela's fragile rock-hewn churches and prevent them from collapsing.
There was an empty space here, so we filled it. After cleaning it, we rebuilt it with stones. We had to cover it with mortar and smooth it out. We always try to obtain the best result. As you can see, there were many cracks and we fixed them.
Ambachu took part in the construction of fortifying structures and 3 stone bridges to restore the site. The project, which is financed by France, has trained 32 artisans to new techniques.
This is stone cutting. Everything is geometrical. It's the first time he's doing this. We started from a drawing. This is the sketch of one of the church's windows. So he did the entire process.
This provided much-needed jobs for hundreds of residents as the city is still recovering from the war.
The work is good. I hope this will continue because many people don't have jobs here. I hope they will also have the chance to work with us.
They're also learning how to preserve their heritage.
We give a training for more than 113 people under the manuscripts, how to maintain the manuscript, how to digitalize the manuscript, how to restore manuscript, and how to preserve and transfer for the next generation.
All manuscripts will be archived in a new digital resource center. In the long run, residents will be able to care for their own heritage.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.